Coming to paperback and e-readers, Esteem Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed all-new Esteem series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Esteem Season of the Witch Girl at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Coming to paperback and e-readers, Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer. Take a trip into the macabre world of goth modeling in the new millennium in this all-new Spinsterella story. Pre-order your copy of Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. One person was killed and 4 people were injured when a vehicle exploded outside of a fertility clinic in Palm Springs, California.
Welcome back. We are starting with breaking news right now in what the FBI is calling a terrorist bombing at a Palm Springs fertility clinic.
We now have the suspect's ID, so we're going to send it out to KCAL News reporter Elise Martinez live outside the Palm Springs Hospital where some of the patients were taken. Elise, can you tell us more?
Hi, we had to move locations. We are on the other side of the crime scene, but we do have new information for you this morning. According to 2 law enforcement sources familiar with the investigation, we have identified the suspect as 25-year-old Guy Edward Bartkus. He's a resident of 29 Palms. It's home to a large Marine base about an hour's drive from Palm Springs. We've also learned that the suspect stated in writings or recordings that he was against bringing people into the world against their will. That's also according to the sources familiar with this investigation. The bomb has been identified as a large vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, and as we've been reporting throughout the morning, its blast could be felt more than a mile away from the blast zone. Investigators have also searched the suspect's residence, those sources telling us as well. And the bomb targeting the American Reproductive Center here in Palm Springs, the director of the lab says it's an IVF lab that helps with fertility treatments. He says buildings were damaged, but staff and embryos survived the blast. But again, the suspect has been identified as 25-year-old Guy Edward Bartkus. He's a resident of 29 Palms. And again, that's about an hour's drive from this crime scene. Again, there is a press conference set for 10 a.m. We're expected to learn more about this person now and possibly a motive for this crime as well. But again, more details coming out in this investigation. For now, we're live in Palm Springs. Elise Martinez, KCAL News.
Now, according to reports, 25-year-old Guy Edward Bartkus allegedly drove a silver Ford Fusion in front of the American Reproductive Centers in Palm Springs, California. And as he drove this vehicle in front of this in vitro fertilization clinic where people went to go get in vitro fertilizations, Guy Edward Bartkus allegedly took out a smartphone and was looking to live stream the destruction of the American Reproductive Centers as part of his pro-mortalist agenda, where he believed that it was better for people to die than to continue existing, and believed it was wrong to bring new sentient life in the world because he believed that people should not be born. Now, as Guy Edward Bartkus was looking to make this statement about his radical beliefs, he then looked to detonate the explosives he had inside of his vehicle. And as he detonated the explosives that were inside of his vehicle, the detonation exploded, winding up killing Guy Edward Bartkus, allegedly, and injured 4 other people in an explosion that would basically rocked Palm Springs, California. Now, the FBI and the Palm Springs police see the behavior of Guy Edward Bartkus as an isolated incident, but when I take a critical examination of Guy Edward Bartkus's alleged behavior, it definitely fits the pattern and profile for beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And it's clear to me that Guy Edward Bartkus was a man in crisis for an extended period of time because, according to reports, his father said that Guy Edward Bartkus had serious issues as related to life, and those issues basically led to him possibly winding up on this road to being a man in crisis even before this explosion. Now, Guy Edward Barkus and his father were estranged ever since he was about 15 years old, because the father said he did not ever see his son for over a decade, and as he had not seen his son in a decade during his adolescence, I believe that this is where Guy Edward Barkus went on the road from being a boy to winding up becoming a man in crisis. Now, according to his father, Guy Edward Barkus really was not a leader. He was basically one of these follower or beta male types, even before, even with his father in his life. And even with his father in his life, he was trying to give him some sort of guidance, but this boy just did not, was a follower, and again, he focused on looking to build things like rockets and basically stink bombs and other bombs during his adolescence. And possibly what happened with Guy Edward Barkus is what led to the separation of him and the estrangement from him, from his mother, from his father. This possibly was the thing that triggered him being on the road to being a man in crisis, not having that father to give him any sort of leadership or guidance. And without him having any sort of leadership or guidance, this follower started looking to find an escape into the internet. And as he looked to find an escape into the internet, what I believe happened with Guy Edward Barkus is that he went down the rabbit hole of the internet as related to conspiracy theories and other forms of misinformation. And as he went down this rabbit hole of misinformation, this is where he started to adopt nihilistic beliefs. And as he adopted these nihilistic beliefs, he then started talking about being the so-called pro-mortalist, a position of believing that it's better for a person to die than to continue existing, and that believing that it's wrong to bring new life into the world, and believes that people should not be born. I believe what happened with Guy Edward Barkus is what happened to many people what happened to many people during the COVID lockdowns as related to these tweens and teens. They basically, as they were locked down, were escaping through the information superhighway, and as they escaped through the internet, they began to read a lot of this misinformation that was presented online by these conspiracy theorists and other speculative theorists. And as they went out here looking to read this misinformation that is oftentimes presented on platforms like Reddit and 4chan and many other websites, what happens to those individuals is they start reading this misinformation and taking it for fact. And that's what I believe happened here in the case of Guy Edward Barkus, who basically believed in anti-life and the idea of anti-life, believing that people should not be born and that people should not be alive. He wound up buying into these beliefs as related to the misinformation he was reading online, and without that father in his life to tell him that everything he was reading was bullshit, and to basically tell him that he needed to take this misinformation with a grain of salt, sadly he wound up believing this misinformation that he grew up reading as truth. And this is what the thing that has affected this entire generation of people who were a part of Gen Z and part of Generation Alpha and Generation Beta. They basically were born with these computers, and as they were born with these computers, they wound up believing that all the information you're seeing online is true. It's very different from Gen X and millennials, who we grew up with television. And as we grew up with television, we were always told that TV wasn't real and not to take everything we hear on TV as real. Unfortunately, what's happened here with this young boy, who I believe is possibly a Gen Z or a Generation Alpha, basically this boy, as he was growing up into manhood, wound up buying into all of this misinformation that he saw on the internet believing it to be the truth, and because he couldn't discern the difference between fact and opinion, what happened with this young boy, Guy Edward Barkus, is he started to basically believe that these were normal beliefs, and went out here and looked to act on the misinformation he was reading online. And as he was looking to act on the misinformation he believed that was online, he was having personal problems with his life, according to some reports. Now, according to some reports, he was having issues with his girlfriend and had an argument with her, and was having other issues with his life. And all of those things, I believe, led to him not having the coping skills to be able to deal with the things of everyday life. And as he saw the world not going right for him, this is where he started to look to reinforce these anti-natalist views that he had by looking to make a statement, because he felt he had nothing to live for. And because he felt he had nothing to live for, this is where he looked to make a statement as related to the anti-natalist views that he presented in his rambling writings, and looked to go out here and make that statement by looking to destroy the fertility clinic in Palm Springs, California. And as he looked to destroy this fertility clinic, he looked to participate in this act of terrorism by going out here and, according to some reports, going out here and building a bomb to go and blow up this fertility clinic, and wanted to go out here and make this statement by going to social media and going on social media allegedly to record this event. And as he was looking to record this event, sadly, he didn't have enough critical thinking skills to understand that if you stand outside of the clinic in front of the vehicle that you're going to make the explosion with, that basically explosions are going to destroy everything around you. And if you stand in front of this vehicle that the bomb is in, you're going to get caught up in the blast. But that's what happens with many beta males, because many beta males, when it comes down to things, they live in a rose-colored reality. And as they live in a rose-colored reality, they don't see life in the real world or understand the consequences of life in the real world. No, when it comes to beta males, they basically see a world where everything is distorted, and they get caught up so into the ideas that they're having, they can't see the real world consequences of them. And that's where this guy, who was so anti-life and had nihilistic views, ironically wound up losing his life in the explosion, where he was looking to make a statement as related to being anti-life and looking to make a statement about being anti-life, that where he wound up, the only person losing their life was him. And as he wound up losing his life, he wound up making a statement that showed how irrelevant his whole plan was, because the only person who wound up losing their life was him, and he didn't even do any damage to that entire clinic whatsoever. No, the clinic basically survived, and all the embryos wound up surviving the entire explosion, because this guy had no critical thinking skills to understand how this building was constructed. No, he was basically caught up in his emotions about the whole belief system that he had adopted from the misinformation he got in the internet as related to his anti-natalist views. And as he had this anti-natalist views, which said people should not continue to procreate, he basically showed how completely backwards he was, because the whole reason for everything on this earth is because God wants people to be fruitful and multiply. This is what he said in his word before this guy was even a thought in anybody's mind or a gleam in anybody's eye. I mean, God, when he created the earth, he stated that he wanted people to be fruitful and multiply. He wanted people to go out here and have families, and he wanted people to have children, and he wanted those people to have children because he wanted the gospel to continue on as related to the sacrifice that his son Jesus made when he paid the sin debt of all mankind, and he wanted to give people an opportunity to receive his free gift of salvation so that they could receive eternal life. Unfortunately, in the case of Guy Edward Barkus, this beta male, he basically wanted to go out here and play God, because he basically felt like his life was falling apart, and he felt like his life was falling apart because his father had basically was possibly forced to leave the family because possibly his feminist mother had issues with his father, and that possibly led to them separating. And as they separated, this boy who was in a divorce became a man in crisis, and again looked to cope by going to the internet. As he went to cope with the internet, possibly went out here and started to adopt these anti-natalist views, and looked to adopt these anti-natalist views, and looked to try to go out here and try to be a god in and of himself, trying to control people. And when he couldn't control people and his life fell apart, basically went on to go out here and participate in this act of terrorism, an act of terrorism that will lead to him winding up going out in infamy in an ignominious fashion, because he became the only victim of his own explosion, and showed how this guy really didn't have any sort of male life skills or male survival skills as related to critical thinking, using logic and reason, or understanding how reality works. This guy basically, again, living in his own world as related to being anti-pro-life, and basically wound up sending himself to the shadow realm, where he's not going to have to deal with life anymore. He possibly will be dealing with having to encounter the second death, something that God does not want anybody to encounter, because the second death means you're separated from God. It means that you're going to live the rest of your eternal life in darkness, live the rest of your eternal life in hell. And this guy basically put himself on that road and didn't appreciate the life that God had given him and the opportunity that God had given him for a gift of salvation, a gift of eternal life. This guy didn't appreciate anything as related to life, because he was possibly so caught up in the misery of the failure of his father's marriage as related to things. And his father basically was talking about how this boy didn't even understand anything as related to taking the lead in his life, because the man who was supposed to teach him about life basically wasn't there. And he wound up following behind the radical rhetoric of misinformation online, and basically is proving a point about a trend that I've been seeing emerge over the last 2 to 3 years regarding a lot of kids who grew up in this internet age. A lot of these kids who are growing up in this internet age, there's nobody there to supervise them on the internet. And as they're getting on this internet in these personal devices like smartphones and tablets, what they're doing is reading a lot of misinformation and not being able to vet that information, because nobody has sat down and told them that when it comes to this internet, again, anybody can post anything on here. And if you don't have verified sources to basically give you actual information to say that this is a fact, you'll wind up believing this misinformation to be the truth. And as you believe this misinformation to be the truth, you can put yourself in a series of misbeliefs that can wind up putting you on the road to winding up going from being a healthy person to winding up becoming a man or a woman in crisis. Because I've seen this both with tween and teen boys and young adult women and men, again, sitting there reading things on the internet without ever going to go do a basic search. And it's hard to even get the information with a basic search, because algorithms like Google basically go out here and feed people more misinformation based on what they're clicking on. The AI and machine learning go out here and further miseducate people, because as they're reading this misinformation, there's no disclaimers to tell them that this is speculative information and that things here are not possibly true. And without that disclaimer, like I got back in the 1980s when I was growing up, I remember being 7 years old and learning TV wasn't real when I was watching a Star Wars special. And as I watched the Star Wars special that showed all the special effects for Star Wars, it basically allowed me to see, okay, a lot of things I'm seeing on TV are not real, and I need to take whatever I see with a grain of salt, especially as related to things as related to speculative theories. Because I remember being a kid and being a teenager, I remember in the late 80s people telling me about, how there's the government was involved in the drug game and all this stuff. And I basically, until I got confirmation from sources didn't really believe that. Again, when it comes to speculative information, you have to take it with a grain of salt. You cannot make it who you are, because if you make it who you are, you will wind up in a situation like Guy Edward Barkus, where you won't be an adult who will be able to function as a man. No, you're going to wind up a man in crisis. Now, if you want to learn how to identify the behaviors of beta males and help someone in your life break out of the beta male pattern and get on a road to healthy critical thinking, and basically get their life in order, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos talking about the man crisis that's going on in this country as related to misinformation, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App so I can continue to stay on the air. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA, from the Black Boule, in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.